So, Max Richter, you're the composer of Hostiles, which is not your typical Western, to say the least. When you first got offered this job, what were your initial ideas for the music?
Well, as you say, it's not your typical Western. And the thing that struck me about it was, I mean, obviously it's an amazing piece of storytelling, but in common with, some of the sort of Westerns of a previous age, sort of golden age Westerns, it offers amazing opportunities for music because of the amount of space in the film. The landscape is a huge part of this film, and it's beautifully photographed. And, it offers this sort of medium for the characters to sort of find their story in, but it's all held in this extraordinary landscape, which can be populated also by music. It reminded me a little bit, the visual storytelling reminded me a little bit of some of the sort of classic sort of spaghetti westerns, which obviously had amazing music from Ennio Morricone. So yeah, it was a very exciting prospect.
So, tell us a little bit about your composing the themes of the movie. I mean, what were the initial ideas for it, I guess?
Well, it was an interesting one, actually, because the images were so eloquent and it's so beautifully shot that it was really a sort of question of sort of feeling my way and exploring my way into that space. And I ended up using a kind of a quite abstract orchestral language, all based on sort of resonating drones and various sort of string textures. And that became my sort of world. And then to populate that world, we have the themes for Blocker and Rosalie. I mean, the score is thematic. It's, it has strong sort of melodic elements in the foreground for these main characters, set against this background of a kind of abstract orchestral writing.
Talk a little bit more about those themes for those characters. I mean, Blockhart goes through a very interesting arc throughout the course of the movie. How did you chart that for the film?
Well, I felt really that Blocker is a kind of, he's a decent guy, but he's been pushed through his life experience into a very dark place. And really part of his sort of challenge really in the movie is not just to kind of be consumed by that darkness. So Blocker's theme is this sort of melodic arc which just extends downwards all the time. It starts quite high and it just keeps rolling downwards. So it has this sort of gravitational inevitability. And then, of course, we hope that he doesn't go down with it. But it's almost like he's being pulled down by this material. Rosalie's music is more tender and lyrical. I mean, her story is one of a sort of brutal loss. And her life is just smashed to pieces, really. So yeah, I went for something a little bit. I wanted to evoke basically the children that she's missing in her life and in the movie. So that was a sort of what informed that, and that's set around some very simple kind of childlike piano music.
You mentioned all of the space in the film, and certainly there are a lot of quiet moments, a lot of moments that sort of show off the beauty of the landscape that they're in. Can you talk about how your music helped underscore that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, quiet and activity, they're contextual, aren't they? Because, it is a quiet place out there, but you can also make it feel quiet in different ways, quiet peaceful, quiet forbidding, quiet terrifying, and the music, the architecture of the music around those silences sort of steers us through them in a particular emotional way. I mean, there are moments in the film where there is, there's quiet, and then, some extraordinary event will happen, and you know, you set it up by configuring the silence with the music.
Mhm. It also doesn't shy away from the violence that was a part of
Yeah.
this time period and a part of this genre. Can you talk a bit about that? How you express that with your music?
Yes, I mean it is very violent, and it isn't. It's neither pornographic nor does it romanticize the violence. It presents it rather plainly. Um, it's and it is, you know, there are horrifying things happening in the film, which of course, you know, happened, I'm sure, you know. So, you know, it's part of the whole picture, the whole storytelling of that time to include that material. Um, and I chose again to, in a way, the violent music grows out of that landscape material. It's sort of abstract, orchestral, quite coloristic, sort of avant-garde writing, and that sort of grows into this sort of more violent music. And for me, that's because, you know, that those situations are really an outgrowth of that, you know, of that landscape, of that place.
Was there a particular moment in the movie that was difficult for you to come up with the right musical theme for?
Not really. I felt that. I mean, I think it's always the case when you have, you know, a great piece of storytelling, as this is, and so beautifully, you know, written and directed. You've basically got sort of solid gold coming in the door, you know, and there's something. Once you find, I just for me personally, you know, once I find my language, which really feels like it's part of that world and, you know, enriches that world and incorporates it, then it's kind of easy. It just sort of happens. And I think that's always a good sign. You know, you just feel like the material, everything's catching fire, and it all just starts to add up to something more than the individual elements.
You mentioned the writing and directing. That's by Scott Cooper. Talk about working with him. What was that collaboration like?
Scott is a real pleasure to work with. He's an incredibly smart and thoughtful guy, and you know, he seems to have sort of explored every dimension of this story. It becomes very clear immediately when you're talking with him about the film that he's already thought the things that you're thinking about. So he knows it very deeply, and he is very thoughtful and respectful about music. So yeah, I mean, it was very stress-free and a very enjoyable sort of collaborative process.
You've been at the music making business for a while now. What is your process like? How has it changed over time?
Well, I mean, I get, you know, every project brings its own dynamics in a way. But I mean, I guess I'm always writing. You know, if I'm sort of awake, then I'm writing. You know, it's just what I do when I'm in a room. If I'm sitting somewhere, I'm driving, whatever I'm doing, there's stuff happening. You know, so it's a kind of a kind of automatic process in a way. And when a new project sort of comes over the horizon, you immediately get a bunch of thoughts, a bunch of ideas which start to populate it. And it's really about trying to form those things in a kind of a sculptural way, really, so that they can connect and enrich the storytelling language. It's very, you know, it's a lot of experiment, a lot of sort of trying stuff. And then very quickly it becomes obvious, you know, which things kind of thrive in that world.
You received your very first Emmy nomination earlier this year for Taboo. What did that recognition mean for you?
Well, I was really pleased about it. You know, I mean, Taboo is, I don't know what to say about Taboo, really. I feel like with Taboo, we're dealing in a almost like a kind of grand opera. It's like, so everything is turned up to 11 in Taboo, you know. You know, from Tom's sort of extraordinary character to the, you know, the very powerfully made show, and great fun to be part of. So I mean, yeah, it was nice that it's been recognized. Yeah.
This year also saw the end of The Leftovers. That's a show that you worked on for 3 years, saying goodbye to that show. What was that like, and what was working on the final season of it like?
Well, I mean, The Leftovers, I'm obviously very biased, but I mean, The Leftovers is like the best thing that's been on TV for years, I think. But I would say that, of course, but I'm very passionate about The Leftovers, and I thought it was a really special show. And it developed the sort of all sorts of storytelling languages, which you see echoing out in all sorts of different shows ever since. And, I'm very proud of the work we did on that. Damon is a wonderful storyteller, an extraordinary creative mind. And yeah, it was just, a wild ride from start to finish. And I mean, I think nothing lasts forever. It would have been nice to do more, but I think it's, the 3 seasons really add up to something.
You're next going to be heard in the film White Boy Rick. Are you still working on that right now? What can you tell us about it?
Well, we finished it. White Boy Rick is great. It's a beautiful film based on a true story with Matthew McConaughey doing an extraordinary job. It's very emotional, very tender, quite brutal, and great piece of storytelling from Jan Demange, director. Fantastic.
I certainly look forward to it. Max Richter, pleasure talking with you again. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thanks. Bye-bye.